The scout ship Vanguard was never engineered to endure the crushing atmospheric physics of PX-47. To the Federation's long-range orbital sensors, the planet had appeared as a standard terrestrial candidate, a vibrant, emerald orb swaddled in thick, violet-tinged clouds. But as the 30-meter vessel pierced the upper thermosphere, the crew realized that the fundamental laws of gravity, fluid dynamics, and scale were being rewritten in a language of pure, terrifying violence. The air was not a gas. It was a dense, viscous medium that fought the hull with the resistance of deep-sea water, dragging at the titanium skin with a physical, hungry weight. Every stabilizer on the ship shrieked in mechanical protest, a high-pitched metallic wail that vibrated through the floorboards and into the marrow of the crew's bones. The drag coefficient reached numbers that defied the ship's onboard logic, causing the navigation computers to cycle through error messages in a frantic strobe of crimson light. Atmospheric density is spiking. It's at 400% and climbing. Malik's voice was a jagged spike of adrenaline over the internal comms, his fingers dancing across the navigation console to compensate for the drag. "Captain, the sensors are screaming. They're detecting liquid spheres in the upper atmosphere. Not rain, massive, wobbling globes of water the size of starship hangars, suspended in the air like heavy, liquid mountains." Captain Allara Voss gripped the armrests of her command chair, her knuckles turning a waxy white against the dark leather. Her eyes were fixed on the primary viewport, where the violet clouds were being shredded by the ship's descent. "Keep the nose up, Malik. If we catch the surface tension of one of those droplets at this velocity, it won't be a crash, it'll be a kinetic assassination. The hull will snap like dry glass under the weight of a falling ocean." Outside, the storm was a nightmare of impossible proportions. Enormous, shimmering orbs of liquid, each 100 times larger than the Vanguard, tumbled through a sky that had turned a bruised, electric purple. They didn't fall. They descended with a terrifying, slow-motion weight, wobbling with internal currents that looked like shifting tectonic plates. The ship was a silver needle threading a minefield of liquid giants. A massive, shimmering sphere suddenly loomed in their flight path, and as Allara yanked the manual override, the Vanguard banked hard. The port wingtip grazed the liquid skin of the orb, and the ship was nearly swallowed by a cohesive force so strong it felt like the hand of a ghost pulling them into the abyss. A fine, cloying mist coated the titanium skin, instantly freezing into a slick, heavy layer that threw the stabilizers into a mechanical seizure. The ship groaned, a deep, guttural sound of metal reaching its breaking point. Then, the sky ignited. It wasn't a standard electrical discharge. A pillar of white fire, nearly a quarter-mile in diameter, slammed into the landscape miles away with a brilliance that turned the cockpit into a bleached white void. The sound wasn't a crack of thunder, it was a tectonic roar, a low-frequency displacement of the entire atmosphere that sent the Vanguard into a terminal, uncontrolled spin. "We're caught in the shockwave," Calder shouted over the groaning of the airframe, his hands straining against the secondary flight controls. "The engines are stalling. The air is too rich, too heavy. It's flooding the intakes with a thick, nitrogen-heavy sludge." The ship plummeted. Below them, the forest rushed up to meet them. It wasn't a forest of wood and leaf, it was a dense, vibrating jungle of emerald pillars. Each trunk was hundreds of feet tall, smooth and waxy, swaying with an elastic strength that defied the ship's kinetic energy. The Vanguard sheared through the top of a pillar, the green stalk bending like a massive spring before whipping back and launching the ship toward a second stalk. The vessel skipped off the vegetation like a stone across a pond, finally plowing into the ground with a series of rhythmic, bone-jarring thuds. It skipped across jagged, translucent boulders, each the size of a municipal building, before sliding into a deep, shaded canyon of silica sand. Silence followed, thick and heavy, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of escaping steam. The air inside the cockpit smelled of ozone and the cloying, sweet scent of crushed, mineral-rich vegetation. Allara unbuckled her restraints, her boots clanging on the deck plating, which now sat at a steep, 15-degree angle. "Sound off," she rasped, wiping a smear of blood from her jaw. "Vitals are steady," Tara reported from the medbay, her voice shaky but clear. "But ARA, the exterior sensors are reading the ground as 90% crystalline silica. These aren't rocks. They're jagged, transparent shards of quartz, but scaled to the size of house-sized boulders." It's like we landed in a mountain range made of broken glass. The gravity is consistent, but the air pressure, it's like being at the bottom of a planetary trench. Malik crawled out from under the engineering substation, his face pale and smeared with grease. The luck is gone, Captain. My primary data chip, the one with the diagnostic maps for the plasma coils, flew out of the port during the tumble. Without it, we can't purge the sludge from the intakes. We're paralyzed. The ship is a dead weight. Forget the chip for now, Calder grunted, eyes fixed on the primary viewport. Look at the trees. On the external monitors, the forest was a terrifying emerald abyss. The green pillars towered over the ship, their tapered points disappearing into a low-hanging mist of vapor. They weren't bark-covered. They were translucent, with veins of fluid pulsing rhythmically inside their waxy, reinforced walls. The canyon they had landed in was formed by two massive sand boulders that leaned against one another like tectonic plates. Every biological scan returned a profile that was utterly alien. The leaves were broad, serrated blades of grass, each one thicker than the ship's hull and capable of reflecting the dim, violet light of the sky like a mirror. The sheer scale was suffocating. Small moss-like growths at the base of the pillars were revealed by the scanners to be tangled networks of vine-like structures, each as thick as a man's torso. Biological analysis is impossible, Lena, the biologist, whispered, her eyes wide as she scrolled through the data. These aren't trees. They're monocots, simple cellular structures, yet scaled to a size that breaks every law of biological square-cube theory. The ground is a silica desert, and these stalks are reinforced with mineral deposits. It's a mineral-based biology on a gargantuan scale. The very air is heavy with moisture, saturated to the point of being a liquid suspension. We aren't just in a forest, we're in a giant's garden. Suddenly, the world began to shake. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't a quake. It was a localized seismic event, rhythmic and calculated. Each thud sent a vibration through the ship that made the internal bulkheads scream. Outside, the house-sized sand boulders shifted, grinding against the hull with a sound like a mountain being crushed. A deep, guttural resonance filled the air, a geologic groan, a subsonic rumble that bypassed the ears and vibrated the crew's chest cavities. Seismic activity is off the charts, Malik whispered, huddling near the reactor. It's coming from the north, and it's moving toward us. The amplitude of each shockwave is doubling. The dim green light of the undergrowth was suddenly obliterated. A white sun erupted in the sky above the canopy, a focused, artificial beam of light so intense it rendered the green pillars translucent, revealing the pulsing, sap-filled veins within. The beam swept back and forth across the canyon floor, a searchlight of cosmic proportions that turned the shadows into pits of obsidian. The heat from the light hit the hull, making the metal pop and expand with sharp, alarming cracks. To the crew, it felt as though they were being examined under a microscope by a power that existed on a different plane of physics. It's an atmospheric anomaly, Allara stated, though her voice lacked conviction. Some kind of focused solar flare or natural luminescence from the upper layers. We need to focus on survival. Malik, what do we need to get the coils back online? The data chip is gone, Malik said, but if we can gather enough raw crystalline silica from the boulders around us, I can manually recalibrate the intake filters. But we're talking about tons of material. We'd have to mine for a year with the handheld industrial cutters just to get a fraction of what we need. The purity level out there is too low. Then we start now, Allara said, her professional facade hardening. We don't open the airlock until we have a plan for a shelter. If the environment is this hostile, we have to fortify. We use the trees as ribs for a dome. We clear a perimeter and set up a mining station. Stepping out of the airlock was like stepping into a nightmare of scale. The air was so thick it felt like breathing warm silk, tasting of sugar and wet stone. The sand boulders were treacherous, slick with the cloying, sweet scent of sap, the sticky liquid oozing from the stalks they had crushed during the landing. The green pillars towered like emerald skyscrapers, swaying with a heavy, rhythmic grace in the viscous wind. Each blade of the forest was thick as a ship's hull, covered in microscopic serrations that looked like jagged glass under their helmet lights. The work was grueling. Calder and Malik led the way with the heavy industrial laser cutters. The beams hissed as they bit into the waxy green walls of the pillars, the heat turning the internal sap into a thick, sweet-smelling steam that clouded their visors. It took the entire crew, utilizing the Vanguard's external winch and their own powered exoskeletons, just to move a single log of felled vegetation. They were tiny, neon-colored specks moving against a backdrop of an emerald abyss. The cellular density is off the charts, Lena said, panting as she dragged a section of fiber. This isn't wood. It's reinforced with silica fibers. It's as strong as carbon steel but flexible. We can weave these together. They spent the first 12 hours in a frantic, ant-like state of labor. They cleared a circle no more than 10 meters wide, hauling the massive stalks into a woven circular perimeter around the ship. They used the stalks as structural ribs, pulling them into a dome shape with carbon fiber tethers and binding them with the sticky, resinous sap that bled from the cuts. It was an epic clearing of a primeval wilderness to them, an achievement of sheer will against a landscape that didn't even notice their presence. Once the dome was partially secured, providing a meager shield against the violet sky, the mining began. Calder took the heavy drill to the base of the crystalline boulders. The noise was deafening, a high-pitched shriek as the drill bit into the house-sized silica shards. For hours, they hammered away at the rock, but the yield was pathetic. The scanners confirmed their fears. The raw materials they needed were locked deep within the mineral matrix of the planet, requiring industrial-scale refining they simply didn't possess. "We're mining for dust," Calder spat, throwing his cutter to the ground in frustration. The sparks from his drill had barely scratched the surface of the translucent boulder. "At this rate, we'll run out of oxygen before we have enough silica to coat a single filter. We're chasing ghosts in a glass desert." The crew huddled in the shadow of the Vanguard, their lights casting long, flickering shadows against the woven emerald walls of their dome. The silence of the canyon was deceptive, punctuated by the distant, wet rustling of the giant grass blades. Then, the seismic tremors returned. They were more violent this time, a rapid-fire succession of thumps that made the silica sand dance like liquid. A massive, dark silhouette suddenly eclipsed the entire sky, plunging the clearing into a darkness deeper than night. A tremendous shockwave slammed into the clearing the moment the silhouette touched down, the force of the displacement hurling the crew against the ship's hull. A beetle-like predator, an iridescent nightmare the size of a heavy tank that had been stalking the perimeter of their dome, was caught in the path of the descent. It was instantly launched into the dark forest of stalks by the sheer rush of air, disappearing with a wet, crunching thud. The crew lay on the ground, gasping as the air pressure stabilized. Silence returned, and the white sun flickered and died, leaving them in the dim, violet twilight. "Captain," Malik whispered, his voice trembling as he pointed toward the center of their cleared perimeter. "Look." In the middle of their camp, where there had been nothing but silica dust and the scars of their drills moments before, sat a massive, seamless cube. It was metallic, smooth, and humming with a strange, internal energy. It was a monolith of refined isotopes, perfectly polished and glowing with a faint blue light that cut through the emerald gloom. It hadn't been there before the seismic shockwave. To the crew, it appeared as though the very heavens had dropped a treasure chest into their midst. It was a gift of impossible purity, appearing exactly when their hope had reached its lowest ebb. "It's pure," Malik said, his scanner chirping in a frantic, melodic frequency as he approached the object. "It's a concentrated deposit of exactly the isotopes we need. It's more silica than those boulders combined, refined to a level we couldn't achieve in a laboratory. It's a miracle. We have the fuel. We have the filters. Where did it come from?" Lena asked, looking up through the gaps in their woven roof at the violet clouds. Her voice was filled with a mixture of hope and profound dread. "Nothing just appears. Not like this. It doesn't matter," Allara said, her eyes fixed on the blue glow of the cube. "It's here, and it's the only way we're ever leaving this canyon. Malik, get the transport sleds. Calder, help him. We bring this inside the dome. We start the integration now." They began the arduous process of hauling the cube toward the ship, their small machines straining against the weight of the refined gift. They worked in a feverish silence, unaware that the real monsoon was about to begin, and that their emerald dome was about to be tested by an atmospheric event unlike anything their sensors had ever recorded, a deluge that would turn their garden sanctuary into a drowning pool. End of Part 1. Part 2. The Horizon Shift. The transition between the light cycles on PX-47 was not a gradual fading of the sun, but a mechanical shifting of the universe's foundations. Inside the woven dome of emerald stalks, the crew of the Vanguard labored in a humid, oxygen-rich gloom that felt more like a pressurized womb than a metallic fortress. The sap resin they had used to bind the grass ribs had hardened into a translucent amber, turning their structure into a ribbed, organic cathedral that smelled of sweet rot, ozone, and ancient minerals. Outside, the environment was undergoing a terrifying metamorphosis. The bruised violet of the sky had darkened into an abyssal indigo, and the seismic tremors had increased in frequency. A rhythmic thump-thump-thump vibrated through the ship's hull, a low-frequency pulse that suggested something was moving across the heavens with tectonic weight. Every instrument in the engineering bay spiked with static interference. "The resonance is shifting," Malik reported, his voice filtered through the heavy crackle of the internal comms. He was positioned at the base of the cube, his industrial welder throwing jagged sparks of blue light against the seamless metallic surface of the mysterious gift. Every time the ground shakes, the cube's internal frequency aligns with the tremors. "It's not just a fuel cell, Allara. It's a bridge. It's drawing energy from the planet's own movement and refining it into a plasma-ready state. If we can finish the conduit weave, we'll have enough power to jump-start the primary coils in less than an hour. But the surge is massive. I've never seen a battery this efficient." "Then move faster," Captain Allara Voss commanded, her eyes fixed on the external monitors. The viewports showed a world of nightmare proportions. The jagged silica boulders that surrounded their clearing were slick with a new, high-pressure moisture that seemed to ooze from the very air. "The atmospheric pressure is fluctuating again. Something is displacing the air on a massive scale. We need to be ready to purge the intakes the second that power is live. If we miss this window, the pressure differential will crush the hull like a tin can." The monsoon arrived without warning. It began with a sound like 1,000 steam pipes bursting simultaneously, a high-pressure hiss that quickly deepened into a roar. A wall of liquid glass, moving with the velocity of a tidal wave, slammed into the grass forest. To the crew, it was a planetary apocalypse. Massive spheres of water, each weighing thousands of tons from their perspective, plummeted from the sky and shattered against their woven dome. The grass pillars groaned, the silica-reinforced walls bending under the hydraulic weight of the descent. "The dome is buckling," Calder yelled, bracing himself against a structural rib as a bead of water the size of a shuttlecraft hammered the exterior. The impact sounded like a drum made of thunder. "The surface tension of the liquid is trying to crush us. If the sap doesn't hold, the weight of a single drop will pancake the hull. Allara, the seals are weeping. Seal the airlock and equalize the internal pressure." Allara shouted over the din. "Malik, status on the cube. 80%. It's feeding off the kinetic energy of the rain. The harder it pours, the faster it charges." As the deluge hammered their fortress, a new anomaly occurred, one that defied their understanding of natural meteorology. A massive, translucent barrier suddenly descended from the heavens. It was a seamless, curved wall of clear, flexible material, hundreds of feet wide, that slammed into the silica earth around the clearing with a dull, echoing clack that vibrated the marrow of their bones. It sealed the Vanguard, the dome, and the cube inside a dry, pressurized bubble. Outside the clear wall, the torrent of water continued to rage, but inside, the air became unnervingly, terrifyingly still. "We're in a vacuum pocket," Lena whispered, her face pressed to the viewport in disbelief. "The storm is still out there, but some kind of physical barrier has been lowered over us. It's perfectly circular, perfectly clear. It's as if the world has been put in a jar." Through the translucent barrier and the gaps in their grass roof, the white sun returned. But it wasn't a sun. It was a focused, artificial beam of light that moved with a terrifyingly precise intent. As the beam swept over the dome, the shadow of a monolithic, dark mass eclipsed the stars. It was a landscape of deep textures, ridges, and pores, a massive, featureless form that hovered over their bubble, blocking out the purple sky. "It's not a tectonic event," Allara whispered, her voice barely audible as she looked at the readout on the gravity sensors. The readings were spiking in impossible directions. "It's a witness. It's watching us. It's waiting for us to be ready. Captain, the cube is fully integrated." Malik's voice broke the silence, crackling with a new, frantic energy. "The coils are screaming. We have 200% power. The diagnostic handshake is green. We can break the surface tension of the entire atmosphere if we fire now, but we have to go immediately. The isotopes won't stay stable in this pressure for long. But we're trapped under the barrier, Calder noted, pointing at the sky. We ignite those engines inside this bubble, and we'll turn this sanctuary into a kiln. We'll be vaporized before we even clear the clearing. We're in a cage. Wait, Allara said, her eyes locked on the monitors. Look at the horizon. The barriers, they're shifting. The clear barrier began to rise. Something unseen gripped the edges of the massive structure and lifted it back into the heavens with a silent, terrifying grace. The night air of PX-47 rushed back in, cool and smelling of wet earth and distant, burnt carbon. The pressure stabilized instantly. Then, a flat, warm expanse, a dark, ridged platform, was lowered beside the ship. It was a vast territory that looked like a continent of marble, descending with a precision that silenced the wind. It's giving us a clearing, Allara realized, her perspective finally shattering. It's not a predator. It's a launch pad. It's a hand. Board the ship. All stations to launch positions. Malik, initiate the purge sequence on my mark. The Vanguard rose from the silica mud on a cushion of blue plasma, its engines humming with a frequency that made the nearby grass stalks dance in a frantic, wind-swept ballet. It drifted onto the dark, ridged platform, a tiny silver needle against the vastness of the expanse. As the ship settled, the platform began to rise, lifting them out of the emerald abyss with a smooth, terrifying acceleration. The crew watched the viewport in stunned silence as the world shrank away. The grass stalks, once towering skyscrapers of waxy green, became a soft, manicured carpet. The house-sized silica boulders became mere pebbles, scattered across a dark, porous soil. The canyons they had feared were revealed to be simple cracks in the dirt of a pathway. High above, a monolithic fortress of brick and glass, a structure of impossible geometry, towered over the forest. The lightning they had seen was a buzzing grid of yellow light on a wooden pillar, a bug zapper on a porch. The monsoon had been a garden hose. The platform stopped, and for the first time, the crew saw the source of the seismic tremors and the white sun. They were level with a face, a young man, his features a landscape of skin and fine hair, his eyes like vast, amber suns filled with a quiet, knowing curiosity. He was the giant, the architect of their survival. He didn't speak. He simply looked at the tiny silver speck in his hand with a smile that spanned their entire horizon. He raised his other hand. It was a continent of flesh moving through the air with a grace that defied its mass. He didn't reach for them. He performed a slow, rhythmic wave of his fingers, a farewell greeting that spanned miles of their perspective. He knows, Lena whispered, tears blurring her vision as she stared into an eye the size of a nebula. He knew we were there the whole time. He wasn't hunting us. He was gardening. He was helping us find our way back. Fire engines, Allara commanded, her voice thick with a mixture of terror and awe. The Vanguard shot upward, a silver streak of light that pierced the night sky of PX-47. As they accelerated, fueled by the isotopes of the cube, the planet revealed its true identity. It wasn't an alien world of violet trees and emerald canyons. It was a blue and green marble, Earth, receding into the darkness of the void. They weren't explorers of a new frontier. They were survivors of a suburban backyard, finally returning to the scale they belonged to. Allara sat back in her chair, watching the giant's world disappear into a tiny, flickering point of light among the stars. The sensors were finally recalibrating to the vacuum of space, the noise of the atmosphere replaced by the cold, beautiful silence of the cosmos. Captain, Malik said, looking at the data chip that had been recovered from the internal sensors of the cube. The materials he gave us, the cube, it's not just fuel. It's refined for interstellar travel. The isotopes are more advanced than anything in the Federation's database. He didn't just save us. He upgraded us. He gave us the stars. No, Malik, Allara said, watching the empty space where the giant had been. He was just a neighbor. And we were just passing through his lawn. We were a broken toy he decided to fix. The Vanguard turned its nose toward the deep black, leaving behind the forest of stalks, and the man who had waved goodbye to the smallest explorers in the galaxy. They weren't just survivors, they were the only ones who knew that in the right light, a single backyard could be an entire universe, and a god could be found in the simple act of lifting a plastic tub to let the travelers go home. As the ship jumped into warp, fueled by the giant's gift, the last thing they saw on the long-range scanners was a massive, waving silhouette against a backdrop of porch lights and summer crickets, a guardian of the small, standing at the edge of the infinite.